Thank you for joining us for today's Community Telephone Town Hall. My name is Catherine Vegas, and I'm the Associate Director Operations for the Executive Office of Mayor Muriel Bowser. Today, we are once again joined by Chancellor of DC Public Schools, Dr. Louis Farabee, who will be providing an update on DC Public Schools COVID protocols. This is a monthly series of updates on the subject, so be sure to follow along to have your questions answered. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that if you would like to ask a question at any time during the call, you can press 0, and you will be added to our speaker queue. And now I would like to pass it over to the Chancellor.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I am Louis Farabee, Chancellor for DC Public Schools, and we're excited you joined us this evening to chat a little bit more about some of our health and safety protocols, our COVID response, and district updates. This evening, I am joined by members of our team, which includes our communications person in Jessica Jennings, and then we also have our leader for student support services, Dr. Bryn Elliott. They will be joining me this evening to highlight some of the work associated, again, with our COVID response and district updates. As we think about today, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge what today is and say Happy Valentine's Day to the entire DCPS community. As you may know, you think about our capital commitment, one of our values is love. And we think of it in a way in which we want to ensure that all of our students feel loved, challenged, and prepared so they can positively influence society and thrive in life. We're excited today as we go forward to highlight some of the announcements that came from the mayor last week. I want to stop, just remind everyone that school budgets were issued last week. You may have heard from Mayor Bowser, we have another year of historic investment in our public schools that we're extremely grateful for. We appreciate the mayor's leadership and the council's commitment to ensuring that DC Public Schools has the resources to support our students and families. We know this year is important as we think about the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and ensuring that our schools are stable and ensuring that we have resources for acceleration and also continue to double down on mental health supports. You can go to the DCPS budget website to gather more information on school budgets, and we're currently in the phase of local schools advisory teams collaborating with principals to develop the initial budgets. When we think about what was allocated to schools this year, it's important to note that no school received an initial allocation less than their initial budget that was a part of the mayor's budget that was submitted to council. It's important that we have this level of stability to ensure that schools are able to maintain as much as possible year-over-year results. This is also a one-time year of stability dollars through the mayor's recovery fund and also the DCPS stability dollars that are being allocated to schools. As you see on the graphic, there are 3 buckets of dollars that we are allocating to schools as a part of our updated budget model. When you think about an updated budget model, I want you to think about our goal and our mission to be more transparent, ensure that we have a budget that's more equitable, and also a budget that provides greater stability for our schools year over year. As a result, these 3 buckets provide those level of supports for our schools. It begins with enrollment. So we first look at the enrollment of a school, despite size or population, to ensure that they have the appropriate resources. And then we layer on top of the dollars for enrollment, targeted dollars for our special populations or populations of students we know need more dollars. And then on top of that, we have our stability funds, which we do a check to ensure that the school has all the baseline resources to operate effectively and efficiently. Again, you can learn more by going to the DCPS budget website to get school information and the overall district budget. Now I'm going to turn our attention to some of our COVID response items and ensure that you're updated on the latest. You may recall after the winter break, we had a safe to return school protocol where every student and staff member was required to produce a negative test before returning to school against COVID-19. We will be having the same process as students and family members and staff go into the February break. We'll be expecting all of our students and staff members to return with a negative test once we complete the February break. We will be providing students and staff members with the antigen-based kits to test over the break before they return. We're also continuing to implement our weekly testing program for our pre-K students to ensure that we can keep our youngest learners in the classroom. We're also utilizing the antigen-based testing kit for our pre-K students as well. This is required for those students in grades pre-K 3 and students in grades pre-K 4. We're also providing free test mail kits to all close contacts, and then we're also providing to all staff members the ability to sign up for weekly testing as well. As we think about the rapid antigen-based kit, we do remind families that they can complete this test at home. It takes approximately 15 minutes to do so, and we ask that you upload your results on the DCPS platform. Again, we issue these kits to families on a weekly basis in pre-K, and then we also will be issuing it to all students when they return from the break. Now, as we think about our test to return process and how we keep students in school, I'm going to now turn it over to Dr. Elliott, who's going to share a little bit more about how we're utilizing these test results and some of our protocols in terms of uploading results and how to ensure that students and staff members continue to remain safe.
Thank you, Chancellor, and happy Valentine's Day as well. One of the questions I want to be sure families are clear on is, what do I do if my child tests positive? So again, as the Chancellor stated, once you complete your testing, you should upload the results in the database, and whether the results are negative or positive, please upload those results. And I also want to emphasize that regardless of vaccination status, anytime someone receives a COVID positive test, they must immediately begin quarantining, as that would be indicative of having an active COVID infection. Also, just for clarity, there is no process, a testing process by which you can reverse a positive test. And I know this has been a question that we have received quite a bit in the last couple of months. Folks that had actually taken the antigen test, which detects a live infection, and then later takes a PCR test and gets a different result. But once you have a positive result, we have to follow through on the isolation requirements for that positive test. So there is no option to test out. We could go to the next slide, please. DC Health recently updated their COVID guidance, which allows us to actually shorten the the isolation period for anyone who tests positive. So in the past, you may recall that if someone tested positive for COVID, they were required to complete a 10-day quarantine period. There was no early out. You had to at least quarantine for 10 days. And now, as health guidance has evolved, that quarantining period can actually be shortened under a couple of conditions. So it really depends on the severity of your COVID infection. And schools can help to guide you if you have questions about this, but I'm going to try to really keep it very simple. So if you are a person who has had severe or critical COVID, or someone who is immunization compromised, you must isolate for a minimum of 10 days. So for that small group of personnel, individuals, you still have to complete the 10-day quarantine. However, if on test to return or in other circumstances, you've taken a test and you have tested positive, but you have no symptoms, you actually can shorten that quarantine period to 7 days. And this is the process by doing this. So after 7 days from the onset of symptoms, with day 0 being the onset of symptoms, if you are able to wear a well-fitted mask, you are able to return to school. If you are not able to wear a well-fitted mask, then you have to complete the 10 days of quarantining. That is for persons who have no symptoms, and that would be what we call an asymptomatic infection. If you are a person who has had a mild to moderate COVID infection, you are able to also end your quarantine early if you get past 5 days, and at that point you are fever-free for at least 24 hours without any fever-reducing medication, then your symptoms are improving. Your symptoms don't have to totally be gone. The fever has to be gone, but you may still have some other lingering symptoms. If you test negative on day 5 or later, and this is very aligned to what people were experiencing when they had to quarantine as a close contact. At that 5th day, beginning on day 5 or later, you could actually test out. You can now do this with a positive COVID test or well. And if once you receive that, if you have a negative COVID test on day 5 or later, and that is when you get to day 7, if you're able to wear a well-fitting mask, you're going to be able to return to school at that time after day 7. So it's a little nuanced, again, based on the severity of your infection, but the goal is that we are looking for ways that, in alignment with DC Health and CDC guidance, we can get students back to school earlier, but also safely. The final thing I wanted to indicate is in either of those circumstances, you actually receive a positive test on day 5 or later, you must continue to isolate, or if you decide that you don't want to test out, if you decide not to do any additional testing, you do have to complete the full 10 days of the full 10 days of isolation. Next slide. That was a lot of content, so I'm happy to come back for questions. I'm happy to go to the next slide with some really good news around our pre-K Test to Stay program. We are extending that program, expanding it to cover all positive cases in our pre-K. Over the last few weeks, we've been utilizing a Test to Stay program for our littlest learners in a group that has been vaccine ineligible. And we have been able to determine after a couple of weeks that we actually can keep our students safely in school using Test A. We were only focused on the students for which they were testing over the weekend as part of our mandatory testing. But now we will be extending that, and actually that was effective February the 10th, that we extended that to all positive COVID tests in a pre-K classroom. And so we'll continue to work and advise families when they indicate to us that their student has tested positive. This certainly has to be in the conditions that the contact has happened at school, where they are identified as a close contact. And what we do in this program is that once we have an identified a positive case, and the other students in that classroom are identified as close contacts, we continue to test periodically to ensure that the rest of the students remain COVID-free. And as long as they are asymptomatic, have no COVID symptoms, and continue to participate in routine testing, they're able to continue to come to school. And that has been a very effective process for us in the last 3 weeks. So in the next slide, I'm just going to share with you just a couple of scenarios of how this test to stay actually plays out. So here we have, on this slide, we're talking about all pre-K students. They participate in the required testing on the weekend, so they test on Sunday. In the expansion of the pilot, we could have a situation where there's actually a new case that we are notified of in a pre-K classroom on Monday. So we could say that on Sunday, all students tested and they're all negative. But on Monday, a family may have kept a child home and learns that that child is now COVID positive. As soon as we are notified of that positive case, we seek to do testing within a 24-hour window. So in this scenario, all the students in that impacted classroom, a classroom where there was a positive case, would be tested on site. We would send notification home to families, notifying them of that positive case on Monday. And if students wanted to continue to come to school, they would have to test on. We would do that testing on Tuesday. And if we had a student who tested positive on Tuesday, so we tested on Tuesday, and we could have from that classroom identified an additional positive student. In the case that we do identify an additional positive student, we would test again on Thursday. We would test that class on Thursday. And again, we would follow up with parents to let them know that there had been a positive case on Tuesday and additional testing would be required. And then on Friday, we would send our kids home like we do on every Friday so that families could test over the weekend just to ensure that, you know, students that are coming to school that following Monday, that everyone was COVID-free. So just a reminder about our kit distribution. Currently, we have distributed over 300,000 kits, and these are just the kits to support our ECE weekly testing. To support those operations, but also the operations with regards to our test to return tests that we administer on the on the February break, and that we'll be administering on April spring break. So we have a very robust inventory of tests so that we are able to test all students and staff and ensure that everyone is COVID-free. Each of the schools have received 20 kits per enrolled pre-K and pre-K student, either pre-K3 or pre-K4. And this is a supply necessary to ensure each student is able to receive 3 tests weekly in line with our current test to stay guidance. And the Chancellor has already covered the test to return for all schools, so I won't go back over those details. But also another added protection, another part of our mitigation strategies is to provide extra protections to our staff. So the KN95 mask has been distributed to our teachers, and we will continue with that weekly distribution through mid-April, at which time we would assess again. DC Health has released its updated guidance to us, and we are working on tracking toward high-level implementation immediately following the February break. We have previewed much of this guidance with our principals. We've already begun to socialize and provide training for our school-based COVID POCs, as well as our central office contact tracing team. Just real quickly, a few of the updates. One, now both the PCR and the rapid antigen test can be used for close contacts to return early for quarantine. In the past, the PCR test was the only test that was accepted. That has been extended now for both PCR and the rapid test, so that makes it a lot easier for families. But as a reminder, anyone who is identified as a close contact can have 2 PCR tests mailed to their home, so they don't have to go out and look for those testing. So when you receive your letter notification of being a close contact, on that letter is a link that you're able to click in order to register to receive those 2 kits. You will have to register twice. So you receive your first kit. Once you receive your first kit, if you want a second kit, you're able to also receive the second kit using that same link. Secondly, they just re-emphasized for us that persons who have had COVID in the last 90 days and are asymptomatic do not have to quarantine if they're identified as a close contact. We've had that as part of our guidance before, but just really providing scenarios and clear guidance on what that means for folks who've had a recent COVID exposure and would not be quarantined. Third note here is, and we just talked about this, of shortening the isolation period to 7 days. So now I have a process by which individuals, if they tested positive, they can test out of isolation after day 7, and that aligns to our close contacts being able to test out of quarantine on day 7. So 7 and 7, and I believe that's a lot easier for all of us, our families especially, to keep up with. And then just a few other points. Test to stay guidance was part of the new DC Health updated guidance. Very clear and excited that we have some ways that folks that are usually ineligible to opt out of quarantines now have an opportunity to continue in school. They clarified for schools in districts that you can no longer, like there's absolutely no option to reverse a positive test with additional testing. We've had a number of occasions where physicians and others have advocated for reversing a result, but they have been clear that they will not reverse those results moving forward. And then finally, adults and students over 18 who are eligible must receive the booster to be considered up to date. So in the updated guidance, they clarify who has to quarantine, and it requires people to be up to date on their vaccines. And if you're under 18, as long as you've completed the initial vaccine series, whether it's a 1 vaccine or 2, if it's 2 vaccine shots, then you have to have completed the 2 series. You are considered fully up to date on your vaccines. But if you're a student 18 or older, or you are required to have your booster in order to be considered up to date on your vaccines, and therefore not have to quarantine if identified as a close contact. So I think I'm passing it to Jessica for some additional updates.
Elliot, for walking us through those upcoming policy changes. As a reminder, our current policies remain in effect. We want to update a few policies and guidance for you to keep in mind. An important update, back in December, we had paused audience and spectators at our athletic competitions. Moving forward, our school communities will be able to have audience and guest participation at those events now. Each student participant can have up to 2 attendees in the audience for those events and athletic competitions. I also just want to remind our families about our attendance policies. If your student does test positive for COVID-19, and this test has been done outside of the DCPS school testing system, it is very important that you provide that information to your school community right away. We do need to have written documentation to make sure that those absences are excused. If your student tests positive for COVID-19, again, they are excused absences. We just need the appropriate documentation to make sure we have everything properly noted in our records. I'm going to move ahead now and just touch base on one last thing. We've shared this in our last few town halls, just as a reminder about how you can stay up to date on the COVID cases happening at your student's school. So on our DCPS Reopen Strong website, we post a daily tally for any positive cases reported to the school by 11 a.m. that day. We also send via email to our school communities a notification of how many cases have been reported to the school that day. If you do not receive an email for that day, it means that no cases were reported before 11 a.m. And you can continue to get the accurate, verified information from DC Health at the website listed on the screen. And with that, I'll hand back to the Chancellor.
Thank you, Dr. Elliott. Thank you, Ms. Jennings, for the updates on our COVID response and communications. As we go forward, I do want to reiterate that we are very much so focused on health and safety of students, but we also are keeping our eye on the academic and well-being of our students. And I want to remind the school communities that we have a very holistic approach of how we support our students. One, thinking about their academic needs, ensuring that there's acceleration opportunities as needed, also ensuring that there's extended learning time as needed as well. And this can happen during the day, after school, on weekends, and then ensuring that we have a clear cycle of data analysis, that we're collecting information on student mastery in regards to all of our students and their understanding of the content in our curriculum. As we think about who receives this additional learning time and our most intensive supports, we have organized our supports into a multi-tier system of supports, beginning with Tier 1, which is support accessible to everyone. And this includes examples that are listed here, but vocabulary support that all students might receive, a third grade unit on fraction for all students, and this again is based on grade level content, ensuring that all of our students have access to grade level content. In the second tier, we get a little bit more specific for those students who may need additional support. Here we provide a subset of groups or breakout sessions for students to learn more in small group instruction with a teacher guiding small group instruction on a number of topics or tasks. This could happen during a reading block, a math block, or within a regular classroom time as students are organized into small groups. And then finally, there's Tier 3. Tier 3 is our most intensive level of support, which includes a very small group, one-to-one tutoring at times. And again, this typically happens outside of the school day where students have access to extended learning time. It could happen during the day within the classroom or some type of pull-out setting within the school. But more importantly, we want families to know we are providing our students with a very customized approach to ensuring that they continue their academic success as long as we are in school, and we will continue our health and safety protocols as well. We go forward to the next slide. I do want to remind families that they still have access to our COVID centers. We have COVID centers all across all 8 wards. This is an opportunity for families to get KN95 masks that are needed or desired. We also have an opportunity for families to get vaccinated, and also they can pick up their antigen-based kits as well from our COVID centers. They typically open in the morning at 9 a.m. and open to 7 p.m. in the evening. We do want to remind families as we speak of our antigen-based kits that we will be following our test to return protocol after the February break. So we're asking that all families complete their test of their student on Sunday evening of February the 27th. We ask that you upload your results accordingly, and then we would have all of our students produce that negative test before they return to school on Monday, February the 28th. We'll be following the same protocol for our students and staff as we did returning from the winter break in January. We appreciate your support and collaboration. We know that we had thousands of family supporters in the test of return, and many of our early childhood families participate regularly in our weekly testing. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Farabee. We are now going to move on to the question and answer portion of our program. And just a reminder, if you do have a question at any time during the call, press 0 and you'll be added into our speaker queue. Let's move on to our first speaker. Ms. Catherine Wilkins in Ward 6, you are unmuted.
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello?
Hello.
Oh, okay, wonderful. Thank you. My question is, well, I kind of got a couple things. My daughter is legally blind now, and I want to find out, is there not an option for her to do hybrid at her school that does not have hybrid? The reason why I'm asking is because we're both Muslim, and she's been exempted out of the in-school testing and out of testing for COVID. So what they had us do over the holiday, Christmas holiday, was, okay, Ms. Wilkins, have her stay home for 10 days, and then if she doesn't have any COVID symptoms, just give us a letter for her to come back. While she was home, she kept up with class, starting at 8:30 in the morning, each one of her classes, and she worked online through Clever, and I forgot the other app that she actually works through for her classwork. And so my concern is, why does she have to go to a school that offers the hybrid learning as opposed to being able to do this, hybrid at home? She has 4 more months. She's getting ready to go to high school. Her concern is she's losing her electives, and the virtual learning works a little bit less strenuous and challenging than when she's in school. So my question is that just a broad thing where no one can do hybrid, or can we accommodate for some students?
Thank you for your question. We're happy to support your family. I think the best options that we can put out for you to consider, one is we do have a all virtual academy for students who learn virtually on a daily basis. There are forms that would need to be completed to note the need to do so. Typically, we look for some type of medical waiver in this scenario. For students who are out of school for COVID-related reasons for a short period of time, we do have access to asynchronous learning, which is where students engage at home, but they're not receiving live instruction for a teacher. There are scenarios in which we have live instruction with a teacher via simulcast, so there's some students learning via video at home, and then some are learning in the classroom. We typically utilize this when there's a large proportion of the student population in a class that's out for a period of time, and we can implement that strategy on a temporary basis. What we found is to have a long-term hybrid approach in that manner can be disruptive for students and stifle the learning process, so that is not a long-term offering that we offer to students. So a couple of options for you to consider as you think about the weeks ahead as we continue the school year.
Great, thank you. And now we'll move over to James in Ward 6. James, you are unmuted.
Yes, hi. Thank you very much for hearing me out. I just wanted to say, first point, heard a lot today on the call about what you're doing to help prevent kids from getting sick in school, on focus on their physical health. I haven't heard anything about their mental health. And I think a lot of these mitigation measures at this point, starting with masking, obviously have caused a lot of problems. I don't think I have to point that out. You guys read the papers every day. Very deeply worried about we're creating a construct of fear and anxiety for a demographic group that is minimally affected by COVID. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I'd love to hear when you expect to phase out the mask mandate for children, give people an option based on their risk profile. Love to hear if you agree with my supposition and your comments on what's happening around the country, especially in the Northeast in the last week. But I'm really just concerned about getting these kids back to normal. I think we can target them depending on their risk profile. Most of these school-age kids at this point, other than the pre-K kids, can get the vaccine. And so what I'm hearing in your comments sounds more like 2020 than 2022. So that's my question specifically on the mask, but the other mitigation measures as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your feedback. And we certainly recognize, as I mentioned earlier, that there are needs that our students have outside of our health and safety protocol. And we're applying a very holistic approach to ensuring that our students are continue to excel academically, and that we're also providing social and emotional supports as well. And one of the reasons we're excited about our current budget is it provides the opportunity to ensure that we have mental health professionals in all of our schools and continue to give access to students. As relates to our mitigation strategies and specifically to masking, as we've done throughout this school year and throughout the health emergency, we've dialed up and we've dialed down our mitigation strategy based on guidance from the health department, and also monitoring closely the transmission in our community and among our schools. We, as you heard tonight, have made some changes to our protocols for the audience for athletics and performances. That's one example of many where we will continue to dial up and dial down. So masking is one area that we'll keep our eye on. It's something that the mayor addressed today in terms of the citywide protocols for masking and vaccinations, and we'll continue to monitor those outcomes to determine what will happen for schools. But as the mayor explained today, the current mask mandate still applies to schools and daycares at this time.
Thank you, James, for your question. We'll now move to Lori on the phones in Ward 3. Lori, you're unmuted.
Hello, and thank you for taking my question and for hosting this town hall. It's been really educational. My question relates to outdoor use of masks, and I appreciate that masks are so appropriate and relevant inside the classroom, but I do see that Mayor Bowser's DC Health guidance actually mentions that in schools, masks are not generally needed outdoors, and in fact, CDC guidance also suggests that people needn't wear masks when outdoors. Health, as we have all agreed now, is not merely the absence of COVID-19. It includes mental and social emotional development too. Removing the outdoor mandate, at least, would give our children the chance to have a midday break from 6 hours of masking, see the smiles of their peers, begin bridging the gap for students who have struggled with emotional and psychosocial health over the last 2 years without posing a risk to public health. And I wanted to know, because there really is no evidence to suggest that they must wear masks outside, when the guidance that's come out of the mayor's office as well as the guidance from the CDC will actually be rolled out into schools to remove the masking mandate for outdoor play.
Thank you so much for specifically calling out the masking and the mask mandate that DCPS has established for both indoors and outdoors. You make several relevant points that are outlined in the guidance from the CDC and what's been communicated directly from the mayor and the DC Health team. We're currently evaluating the recent guidance received, and DCPS will be issuing new guidance, and this is an area that we will again be reevaluating, and we'll share back with the community what to expect in the coming days as relates to masking outdoors. But thank you again for raising this topic up.
Great, thank you. Now we're going to move to a few other questions from concerned parents. The first one being, my first grader child is receiving some extra tutoring at school. Are there any plans to continue this through the spring and even summer?
Yes, we are planning to continue our acceleration efforts throughout the spring and going into the summer. We understand while we made some progress this school year, there's still more work to do with our students to ensure that they're on grade level, continue to perform at a high level. We will invite students to summer school. That process will actually begin soon in the coming weeks, so we're asking parents to be on the lookout for that information. And we want to ensure that we have an appropriate balance of activities over the summer, so activities for students to enrich, have fun, but also to learn at the same time. So the answer is yes, and look forward to more information as relates to summer.
Great. Moving to our next question. If attending an athletic event, will I have to provide proof of vaccination or a negative test?
Thank you for that question. So currently, all athletes and performers can invite up to 2 guests, and those guests are not required to produce proof of vaccination when entering the facilities or campuses.
Wonderful. And we'll now move to our final question. Can you clarify again when the tests for my child come home this week, and when, or do I need to go to the school?
So we will be issuing antigen-based kits the end of this week. So by Friday, you should expect to have kits from your child, and schools will also have kits available for pickup at select times. And then again, we're asking everyone to test on Sunday evening the 27th to return to campus on the 28th.
And if I can add in, Chancellor, families should look for an email from DCPS with some of those deadlines and reminders. You'll also continue to hear from us via text to remember to upload your test results on the Sunday, the day before we return to school.
And it looks like we've made it through all of our questions, so I'm going to pass it back over to the Chancellor to close us out for the evening.
Thank you. I think the last question is a great reminder. As Ms. Jennings highlighted, we'll send some text reminders out to families about our tested return on February break. And then we're also reminding our families in pre-K3, pre-K4, and kindergarten to continue to actively participate in our weekly testing protocols. And then reminder to families that our COVID centers are a resource to pick up not only antigen-based kits, but masks, and also a place in which you can give your vaccine. And but finally, as we close, just a reminder, the best and most important strategy we all can take is getting vaccinated when we're eligible. We know that we have life-saving solutions in our vaccine. Reminder to those that are eligible for a booster to please get your booster as well. Thank you for joining us this evening for our updates.